6 reasons why safe spaces aren't actually safe. Hey, it's Prince of Queens. If you are at all familiar with fourth wave intersectional feminist social justice types, in particular in regards to how they act on university campuses, arts and music scenes, and other in-person activist activities, you have undoubtedly come across things that advertise themselves to be safe spaces. If you're unlucky enough to have ever really spent time in them, you're fully aware that this is kind of an inaccurate title for these environments. I think a better one would be a space under the influence of SJW law, kind of like Sharia law. These spaces are not safe. Usually they are psychological war grounds, and I will attempt to explain why. Reason 1. The original purpose of what was called safe spaces was basically diametrically opposed to what these spaces have become. They were used for therapeutic and counseling services in a group setting designed to give a more social dynamic towards individuals seeking a therapeutic process. What was safe about these spaces was that people were welcome to feel free to say whatever they truly felt without the judgment of the rest of the group. For example, somebody could say that although they consider themselves to be a non-racist person, they maybe always want to get up and move to a different seat if they have to sit next to a Mexican person on a public transportation, and that they feel guilty about that. Obviously, that type of statement is exactly what wouldn't fly in today's SJW safe spaces, and somebody would obviously say that this triggered them and made them feel unsafe and probably demand that the person who said this leave, which brings me to the next reason that these aren't safe spaces. The second reason is that it's fairly obvious to most people at this point that these groups simply serve to infantilize and spread paranoia to the supposedly safe people in the group itself. What safe spaces seem to often come down to is basically a bunch of people without much of any sort of direct, rational contact with the outside world, constantly complaining about how awful this outside world supposedly is. Many supposed safe spaces don't allow cis men, or men at all, for example, and yet a very large percentage of what feminists talk about is just men. Do they feel like that's constructive? I just imagine weird, KKK meetings with people sitting around talking about how awful black people are, likely never having hung out with a black person, when all one hears are horror stories about various supposed trauma or real trauma from groups of people that don't follow the same ideology as you or have an identity that you don't approve of. You'll just end up generally terrified when you interact with almost anybody who isn't a black lesbian in a wheelchair, because we know that that is the only people that the fourth wave intersectional feminists will always consider safe. Reason 3. Some safe spaces claim to want people to ask before giving compliments. I am not making this up. Perhaps some people have seen the footage of the woman who got video of some guy on the back of a truck who said hi to her, freaking out as if he sexually harassed her. If compliments are considered potentially invasive, this is obviously a social minefield. I also wonder if asking people if they can give people a compliment will eventually be considered a violation. How far will this go? Reason 4. Hazing. Seriously, these people will try their hardest to make new members of the group that appear potentially problematic looking basically prove themselves as followers of the fourth wave intersectional ideology. For example, I once went to what was supposed to be a queer party, which was really just a lesbian and trans people oriented event with a few token non-white gay guys mixed in. And it's advertised as a safe space, of course. Now, I am tall and bearded and don't look femme at all, so I was getting weird looks. Not long after arriving, I was very awkwardly approached and asked if I consented to dancing with a trans guy right out of nowhere. He asked me if I would consent to dancing with him. They bent over and grinded their butt on me, and I went along with it because although they were basically a chubby and ugly lesbian who had taken enough testosterone to grow a small amount of facial hair, well, I have a sense of humor, so why not? And also because I felt put on the spot. To add insult to injury, within maybe 10 seconds, the person stopped grinding on me and just walked away without a word. It was very strange. I can't help but think that I was basically just hazed in that moment. I think I passed whatever test was presented to me well enough, but it certainly didn't make me super comfortable, and I'm an actual gay guy who the space was supposed to be made for. Reason number 5, they often openly prioritize people of various identities, which is unnecessary. For example, the same stupid, supposedly queer party I was just referencing is run by a total racist, man hating piece of shit, who I was naive enough to be friends with on Facebook for a while. I would regularly see this promoter talking about various things that she was involved in for queer and trans people of color, etc. And she'd even go on so far as to post status updates explaining that, for example, they needed a door person last minute, but she would prioritize people of color ahead of white people to work the door if somebody needed a one-time gig for quick cash. And she would make that prioritization clear in the status update. When you break it down, that is just racism. I mean, I'm willing to say that it doesn't necessarily make a minority an absolute racist if they prefer hiring other minorities or whatever, but there is absolutely zero reason to actually say so publicly. If you feel compelled to advertise your discriminatory hiring practices, that's racist, and nobody should think anything else. Reason 6 is that these are all ultimately authoritarian environments with these strange double standards in place. It creates a volatile environment where conflicts will always break out, but does not allow for people to resolve them like mature individuals. Instead, they will be ejected from the quote-unquote safe space if they do something wrong. There will always be somebody who ends up as basically the authority with the power to ban somebody, and usually they are not a very nice person. These people who are put in charge of the safe space will totally let certain people get away with abusive behavior in the name of not telling them how to feel about their own oppression. Gay white men get treated like shit in safe spaces because we are no longer considered oppressed, and trans people who pass are now similar. I think Asian people will be the next on the chopping block. Starving piranha syndrome always kicks in the end, the only people left will be black lesbian amputees. Alright, I probably left a few reasons that safe spaces totally suck out of my video, so why don't you add yours in the comments, and definitely stay tuned.